I'm Molly Stearns, for those of you I haven't met, and I'm the Chief Development Officer here at Overlake, and many of my peers from the foundation, our foundation team, are also in the room, and so I hope you've been welcomed and have been made to feel at home. We're just so happy to have you here today. We're excited because it's the first time that we've been together for a Circle of Excellence event since December of 2019. A few things happened, as you're probably aware of. We certainly are very aware of these things here at Overlake. But it's really nice to finally be able to have a session that isn't being conducted over WebEx, which is where we started, and then Teams. These informational programs are just, one way we can give back to you, all of you. You're all here because you have a role in supporting Overlake. Our Circle of Excellence members, our corporate partners, our volunteers who are giving of their time, as well as many of them are their dollars as well. We just couldn't do what we do here at Overlake and serve the community the way we do without all of you. And so thank you. So today we're really in for a treat. We're going to be joined in a facilitated conversation with our CEO Mike Marsh and Board Chair Rob Campbell. And I must say that as we discuss Overlake and what's happening, and not only internally, but what maybe shed some light on what you're reading about in the papers about what's happening at the macro level with the healthcare industry. No one can probably better explain this in layperson language than Mike. And Rob has been at Mike's right hand through these last years as our board chair. So I think that between the two of them, we'll get what you need out of this morning. So most of you know Mike. Mike has been CEO here at Overlake for almost 9 years, and has been in healthcare leadership positions across the region for 30 years. Many of also you have met and know Rob Campbell. Rob served as our Overlake board, on our board of trustees since 2010, and most recently as board chair. His background is on the retail finance side. He retired from Nordstrom in 2014 as treasurer and vice president of investor relations. So thanks again for being here. We are taping this conversation today, hence the mic and the different lighting. We will be sharing these recording with all of you later, and also all of the rest of our Circle of Excellence members and corporate partners who weren't able to be here today. So thank you for bearing with the funny AV setup. And thanks to those who submitted questions earlier. Mike and Rob will get to those questions during the course of their conversation. And if there's time at the end, we will open it up for any new questions from the floor. We'll just see how things go. We've got a lot to talk about, and there were a lot of pre-submitted questions. So without further ado, Rob and Mike, we're going to go into Oprah style here.
Well, first, thank you so much for braving whatever elements you had to brave this morning to get in here. And thank you even more importantly for your support of this wonderful mission that is 62 years strong. Now, I didn't tell Mike and Molly this, but as a former Nordstrom employee, I arranged to have personal shoppers just outside here to take you over to the store to update the wardrobe for the holidays, if you don't mind. When Molly told me that this was going to be the format of Q&A, I was really excited. I think it's a perfect format. And for me, because over the last 2 years where I've had the privilege of serving as board chair, Mike and I meet for 90 minutes twice a month. And it's a lot of Q&A, and it's a lot of discussion about healthcare and about Overlake and about expenses and about quality and safety and patient experience. So I feel like, Mike, this is another one of those meetings that you and I have, except we've got some of our Overlake friends here with us. So
yes. My office isn't this big. Otherwise, you'd all be able to join.
Yeah. We do meet on Monday at 10. But anyway, Mike, just to kick things off, and I'm thinking about this from a broad perspective, with all that healthcare has been through over the last several years with the pandemic, with the labor shortage that has been written about, more recently with inflationary pressures and whatever other headwinds, which have been, I think, collectively unprecedented in healthcare. In your view, what is the state of healthcare today?
The state of healthcare I would characterize as extremely fragile. And so just to give you a few statistics that are breathtaking, probably most of you saw in the Seattle Times the report from the Washington State Hospital Association indicating that Washington State hospitals in the first 6 months of this year collectively had a net operating loss of $2 billion. That's not normal. For those of you that haven't worked in healthcare, these are historic numbers that have never been seen in anyone's career. We're about to see the third quarter report, and the forecast for calendar year 22 is that it'll probably double. So by the end of this year, the expectation is that Washington hospitals will have a net operating loss of probably close to $4 billion. One forecast, which is even more sobering, is that if things don't change, then based on the cash burn for hospitals across, but there are about 100 hospitals in Washington State, by the way, that at the current cash burn rate, half the hospitals in Washington State at the end of calendar year 23 will be out of cash. So to describe this as extremely fragile is not hyperbolic language, it's not exaggerated language, it's language which reflects these times that we're living in. It's worth spending just a minute, if I might, as to why is that and why didn't I know about that? Some of you may be asking yourself that question. Others may know this as well as I know this, but it's easy to forget that even pre-pandemic, healthcare in this country has a very fragile economic model. So you're all business people or retired business people, so you'll appreciate what I'm about to say. So in healthcare, over 50% of our business is government pay. So we're paid by Medicare and Medicaid. And those are not rates that we can negotiate. Those are rates that come to us just by virtue of the legislative forum. Medicare pays hospitals in this state at about 80% of cost, not 80% of charges, 80% of cost, and Medicaid pays hospitals in this state about 65% of cost. So now you're a business person, and in this state, urban hospitals in this state have not had a Medicaid increase in 20 years, 20. So Matt, you're all business people, retired business people. 50% of your business pays you below cost. And by the way, this is our prime demographic. I said Medicare, right? Who's the largest consumer of healthcare resources. What that then means is the economic model requires commercial payers to make up the difference for a margin that in pre-pandemic years would be somewhere around 2 to 3%. Again, you're all business people. You realize a 2 to 3% margin in the businesses that you've run is not anything that you would consider to be a healthy Nordstrom margin. But that's been the reality pre-pandemic. And then finally, the model is very inelastic. Many of you may not know this. Essentially in hospitals generally lose money on medical cases and make money on procedural cases. And so when you have something like the governor's shutdown during COVID, just during those 6 weeks that we were shut down, Overlake lost about $35 million just in a 6-week shutdown as a function of the inelasticity of the economic model that our healthcare system, and when I say our, I'm talking about the collective the United States healthcare system is. So then we had the pandemic, and the pandemic added for Overlake, this is just Overlake, about $70 million of cost to us to manage the health and safety of our visitors, our patients, our staff. Only for us, about 2/3 was covered by CARES Act or FEMA funding. You've read a lot. Some of you may have read, well, healthcare is fine. CARES funding covered all of the COVID costs. That is true for some systems, but based on the formula, it wasn't true for Overlake. So and I won't go into the weeds on that, but just suffice it to say, some health systems did get most of their cost, if not all of their costs covered from CARES. Many did not, including Overlake. We had about 2/3 of our costs covered. So then came what I call the staffing shortage. And if COVID was the match, the staffing shortage is the inferno. The staffing shortage that we're experiencing right now in nursing, but not just nursing, it's surgical techs, it's patient care technicians, it's people who work in administrative functions and support services all across our portfolio, makes COVID look like child's play. And so just our wage rate inflation, and I know there's a question around what are we doing to support staff, so I'll hold off on answering that question until later. But our wage rate inflation during the last 18 months, meaning how much our wages as a function of our total investment in our staff, so this is not just paycheck. This might be in things like tuition reimbursement, or it might be in added wellness or mental health benefits, so it's the totality of our costs, have increased 18%. So it's pretty simple math, right? If 60% of your costs are staff, which is true for a hospital, if 60% of your costs are staff and it goes up 18%, and your reimbursement from Medicaid goes up 0%, and your reimbursement for Medicare goes up 1% to 2%, and your reimbursement for commercial payers goes up 3% to 5%, that's a pretty, I say it's simple, but it's not easy. The math is simple, but managing the equilibrium of that fragile state is very, very difficult. So just one more comment, because I've already gotten a little bit, but this is important context because you can't really fully appreciate the what unless you understand a little bit about the why. In addition, there are at least two other major factors that I'll speak to. One is what we call difficult to discharge patients. So we're not the only industry that's experiencing a staffing shortage. Our long-term care friends and allies are similarly experiencing a staffing shortage in their nursing homes and group homes, et cetera. And so we have patients here who no longer medically need to be here, but we can't safely discharge them into a lower level of acuity of environment. So there are patients here at Overlake who have been here 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, 365 days, a year. There are patients all across the Puget Sound, hundreds and hundreds of patients who are sitting in hospital beds. The UW CFO told me that they did the calculation on the cost and we validated it for us. On these difficult to discharge patients who are here 365 days, 180 days, we get paid 19% of cost. 19% of cost. Think about that. Cost $100. I'm going to get $19 out of that. So that's, then the third element is, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but you can be here overnight, multiple nights, and be considered an outpatient. And what that means, as that happens and as more of the environment relative to the payment mechanisms are shifting in terms of how a patient is classified from an inpatient to an outpatient, and the intensity of care required to take care of that patient doesn't change that much. So the nurses in the room will appreciate they don't treat an observation patient or a person who's in a bed who's an acute care patient that much different than they would treat another type of inpatient. So the costs aren't going down, but the revenue associated, the quality of revenue is going down. That's about a 30% hit to us. So that's the equation that has led healthcare to where we are today. And it's incredibly fragile. I'll speak to in a minute some of the things that are encouraging. I thought I'd start off with the as my mother-in-law says, Mike, always punch the bully first. So I thought I'd start off by punching the bully because this is definitely a bully that we're tackling. And we're not alone. Again, I spend time on the phone with healthcare CEOs every single week, multiple of them, and in many ways, Overlake is in a much better state than most of the organizations in the area. Other parts of the country are having similar challenges, but there are some parts of the country that are doing better than the West Coast, and in particular, Western Washington. This is an area that seems to be struggling with the staffing shortage and recovery from COVID slower than other parts of the country. I'll stop there.
Mike, very helpful and insightful. Can you can you talk about, from your perspective, if there are any legislative changes on the horizon that might impact the situation?
That's actually a short answer. No. There's a slightly longer answer. There is, I would say, some constructive ideas being offered around making it easier for difficult to discharge patients to have guardians and have them be placed in a long-term care facility or a group home. So there also is some legislation working with colleges to fill up the nursing pipeline to make it easier to train more nurses. But the magnitude, and there is some conversations going on to try to remedy this issue of not having a Medicaid rate increase in 20 years. So those are three areas, but even if you combine the totality of those three, they wouldn't fix the problem. It will require a multidimensional fix, and multi-year as well.
Yeah. Mike, I asked you the initial question to kind of take a broad lens. If we narrowed the focus to Overlake, can you comment on the state of Overlake today? And then as a follow-up, talk about just what the team has done during this period.
Well, the team's amazing. I mean, I always say I can't be inspiring unless I'm inspired, and I'm inspired every single day by this team. And this team is sitting out here right today because it's not just our staff and our doctors and our volunteers, it's our community members and our corporate sponsors. That's all part of the team, and our board. But Overlake, I like to say what's the same and what's different. So what's the same for Overlake? We have had the three most difficult financial years in our history. That's the same as other organizations across the country and certainly across the state and Puget Sound. I think what's different is actually more interesting, and that is that during this time, we have continued to invest. There are many organizations that have had record losses and have aging plant and facility that they can't fund and capital that they can't afford. We fortunately started our Project Future Care 6 years ago, which places us in a position of arguably having the most modern campus in Washington State. I could be another hospital in another part of Central Puget Sound who has really deteriorating infrastructure, and finding myself with $1 billion price tag or a $2 billion price tag or a $600 million price tag to do the kinds of things that we did here, and I won't be able to do it. What also is different is at a time when we've had COVID, and by the way, we were the third hospital in the country to start seeing COVID patients. Most people know that, but it's worth repeating. At a time when we had COVID, and we still have COVID, by the way. I mean, there are COVID patients here today. At a time when we have COVID, at this historic staffing crisis, and the largest campus redevelopment project in our history, our patient experience scores went up. They didn't go down. They went up. We're in the 95th percentile of patient experience. 95th percentile of patient experience against 1,550 large hospitals across the United States. Think about if you own a restaurant and you have a staffing shortage of waiters and waitresses and hostesses and cooks. And you put the sign up in front of the cash register that said, our service may be a little slower because we have short staff. We have been short staffed as well, But this staff at this organization has pulled together to do just remarkable things to support the patients. And it's showing up in our experience scores. 95th percentile. That deserves letting sink in a little bit. In addition to that, we are in top decile in almost every patient safety and quality indicator that is measured in a comparison basis for the 30 large hospitals that we compare ourselves against across 3 states. Top decile for things like CODIs, CLAPSIs, these are infections, hospital acquired or associated infections, falls, hospital-associated pressure injuries, all the things that can happen to you, and there are many others, all the things that can happen to you when you're in a fragile state in a hospital environment. Overlake is outperforming nearly all other large hospitals in the region. So that's different. And we're hiring record numbers of people. We are hiring people. One of the dividends of this crisis, I guess, is people are getting to know Overlake. And when they get to know Overlake, they like it, both patients and staff. So people who never would have thought, didn't even think about Overlake, are now considering coming to work here at Overlake. And what they're finding is they like the culture here, and they like the fact that they have the opportunity to make a difference in that culture. But the patients are finding us too, because these other hospitals that are on fire, I mean, there are hospitals with 40 to 50% turnover rate. 40 to 50% turnover rate right now. We're at about 26%, probably 28% actually this year. So not great. In years past, it would have been 14, 15%. Gives you some sense of how this all works. But at 40 and 50%. So people are driving from Olympia and Everett. When I got here 9 years ago, 8.5, 9 years ago, we had about 12% of our business came from outside of the east side. Central Washington, Kitsap Peninsula, Everett, Olympia, Tacoma, the west side of the lake. We're pushing 25% now. 25% is coming from outside of the east side. In some service lines, we're up to 40 or 50% is coming from outside of the east side. There are people who, in our structural heart program, which was one of the largest, we just did our 1,000th TAVR case last week, I think it was that right? We're one of the largest structural heart programs on the West Coast.
Can you just remind everybody what TAVR
Sure.
is?
So TAVR it's an acronym for transaortic valve replacement, or is it repair? I'm not sure. So, and it's basically well, I'm not going to go any further than that. I can tell you what it is. We have I think a former patient, a beneficiary. So anyway, that's what's the same. That's how Overlake's doing. I think that this has been a strain on us. We are reducing our capital budgets. We have, as I said, we have continued to invest. We've brought on new groups. We've continued to add new subspecialties like hepatobiliary surgery, foregut surgery, a very complex coronary therapeutic program through Dr. Riley. We've got some new electrophysiology physicians in our cardiology who are doing new types of procedures. So we're continuing to invest, but we are starting to really constrain that this year. So this year in particular, I think if staff would probably feel more of a constraint as it relates to capital than throughout the last few years, and next year will be similar with a very tight capital budget. But again, fortunately, we do have a very strong facility, at least from that standpoint. Not that there won't always be work that needs to be done, but in comparison, it's that way.
I just want to insert a comment here, Mike. As part of our board experience, we have the privilege of going on board tours, and there are various parts of the hospital, and it's to educate us. And it is educational. But one of the things I've been so impressed with is, in addition to having interaction with our chief medical officer or our chief nursing officer or our chief financial officer and other executives that are all very impressive and they very much embody the culture of Overlake, when we go on board tours, what's been so impactful to me is to see deep into this organization the embedding of the culture in our people and how they treat each other and how they treat patients. And this in the midst of an unprecedented time when resources and people and labor have all been strained, and to see the response and their compassion and their expertise has been incredibly inspiring to see. And so I give this organization great credit for how it has responded and how it is continuing to respond during this very, very difficult time. Mike, I'd like to drill down because a lot has been written about the nursing shortage, and it's not not unique to Overlake in any respect. But can you talk about what Overlake has done and is doing in response to that?
Yeah, so first of all, this first thing you said is really important. I mean, I do think you can't just go past culture, and culture is not accidental. It's very intentional, and it starts with really living your values or aspiring to live your values. It's always an aspirational journey. None of us are perfect in doing it every single day and every single action, but I do believe we, in the main, are consistent with aspiring to live our values. And it's not just anecdotal in terms of conversations. All the survey, I've been doing a lot more rounding lately on the nursing floors, and I've been really seeking out either employees who have been here for less than a year, or they're traveling nurses who work for an agency, who are itinerant nurses and who work in multiple institutions across the Puget Sound. And I said, what's different? Good, bad, or indifferent? What's different here at Overlake? And consistently, I hear three things. I mean, it's a script. And actually, I love it, but I didn't write the script. I said, what's different? They almost all say the same thing. The culture here is different. The culture is different. The teamwork is palpable. The sense of team is different. And then the third thing they say is, I know my manager, and my manager has my back. In some other organizations I've been in, I didn't even ever see my manager. And that really, that's really the nurse managers that I'm talking about, mostly the people who are working shoulder to shoulder with the nursing and clinical staff. But in addition to that, in the last fiscal year, we invested, as I said, 18% in all kinds of things that amounted to about $70 million. And some of it's the typical toolbox stuff that you would expect, out-of-cycle wage increases, various bonus structures, whether it's appreciation bonuses, sign-on bonuses, referral bonuses. Those are, I consider to be sort of difficult and appreciated, but they're garden variety in terms of their nature, and that would be typical of what we're seeing in other organizations. What's different here, I think, at Overlake is we've also made investments in development, so career development. We have the most generous tuition reimbursement program in probably the state, but I can say with assurance in Western Washington. We've created a large nurse residency program. We've created apprenticeships, career ladder programs for people who are looking for opportunities to advance. All of those types of programs require investments. So the development side of our investment is part of that $70 million too. And then in addition to that, we put additional energy in especially our benefits, but especially our behavioral health benefits. So we've increased our psych benefit, our behavioral health benefit to our staff. We've partnered with a new employee assistance program that has a much more robust mental health offering that goes live in January. And we've also partnered with a service company that provides concierge services to employees to help them navigate systems and structures that otherwise would be challenging for them in their private life. So finding a group home for an aging mother, understanding that how to enlist in Medicare, or understanding a new benefit that's coming across the transom with respect to the legislation. So that concierge service is called Wealthy, that starts in January as well, is something that employees can take advantage of. But one other thing we did, and in part this was donors, and in part this was our out of operations. During COVID, we created an employee assistance fund, a fund that was for employees who had needs because maybe a spouse lost a job, or maybe the school was shut down and they now had additional childcare costs. And we had an employee-driven committee. Stephanie, I know, was on that committee. Perhaps others in the room were on that committee who reviewed applications from hundreds of employees asking for some form of assistance. And we gave up to, I think, $2,000. And I think the total budget was, do you remember what the total budget was?
Over $1 million.
So it was not insignificant. I don't know of any other organization that did that during COVID.
Very helpful. Mike, I asked you earlier about legislative agenda. I know that in your role as CEO, and I'm not sure others have taken on this assignment as seriously as you have, but I'd say I would describe part of your role is one of being an advocate, not just for Overlake, but for healthcare in the state. And in that role, you've had interactions with the state legislature. Before an issue can be solved, a problem needs to be acknowledged. My question is, what is your sense of the awareness of the state legislature of the severity of the healthcare situation in this state?
I would say in some respects it's high, and in most respects it's low. The respects that it's high, I think there's a clear understanding of the nursing shortage and the implications of the nursing shortage, and how that affects everything from patient care to quality of life for the staff. I'm not totally sure that there's an understanding of how it affects the hospital finances in terms of how those two things are completely connected. I think there's a growing understanding of this difficult to discharge patients, as I said. But, frankly, one of the things I didn't mention when I talked about this existential state that we're in as an industry, already there are hospitals that are closing down services. They're closing down their pediatric units, they're closing down their childbirth centers, they're closing down, in some cases, their ERs. This is not necessarily in this state. Some of my examples are in this state. They're limiting hours. We closed one of our urgent care centers, the urgent care center in Sammamish. They're restricting elective surgery, so self-imposed. Remember what I said about the governor's shutdown on the elective surgeries? We're doing that to ourselves in order to try to decant the backlog of patients that are in the ED, so that, unfortunately, surgical nurses can take care of medical patients so that they can get up to a floor. But in exchange for doing that, we have to cancel those elective procedures. And when I talk elective procedures, I'm talking about things like a TAVR. And I should say cancel, postpone. Postpone is what we typically do. But still, it's an inconvenience, because if you need a TAVR or a hip or any number of other life restorative kinds of procedures, you really don't want to have to wait beyond the time that you've had scheduled with your physician. So I don't think that level of the cascading level of effect. I think we are gonna, before it really becomes an issue, I think we're gonna see much more closures across the state in programs, and in some cases likely hospitals. And I think when that happens, then it will become an all-out crisis that everybody will recognize. I mean, Yakima just affiliated with Multicare. Yakima is, a really tough market. And if that didn't happen, Yakima would go bankrupt, and that community would be without a hospital. And so there's only limited ability for you to sort of absorb all of that strain multiple markets. So I think that's what it's going to take, Rob. I think it's going to take some more dramatic sense of people feeling that my community resource is less than it was.
Yeah. My concern with that is the timing involved for that awareness to happen and then for actions to be taken, and the potential impacts on either incremental suffering or more significant than that as we go forward. That's a comment, not a question. Mike, I want to turn the discussion towards trends in healthcare. So there's been news about, during the pandemic, certainly an uptick in telehealth. There have been shifts from inpatient surgery to outpatient surgery. Pharmacies are increasingly moving into what I'll call primary care, or a version of that. Can you talk about those and how Overlake is responding to those?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing that I want to say about trends in healthcare is we really, in some ways, we're living in some, the tale of two cities. The economic model is broken, and yet there are some remarkable therapies and treatments that are, either on the market, coming on the market, or soon to be coming on the market that will sort of transform the delivery of care and in caring for patients. Unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where our ability as an industry to innovate has outpaced our ability to afford that innovation. And so there are drugs, no kidding, there are drugs that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars per administration. Nobody can afford that. I mean, they're remarkable. They do things that are just would blow your mind in terms of the restorative or curative nature of them. But that's one aspect I just want to point out, is there's more out there that can be done by any organization than these organizations can afford in light of what we've just been talking about. Now, having said that, there's two things that are particularly noteworthy for us. One is digital transformation. Healthcare has been a late adopter to the use of digital technology to really facilitating what I would call a modernized consumer relation transaction with the industry. I mean, how many of you have ever seen a healthcare bill and don't have any idea what you're looking at? I mean, that's an example of what I'm talking about. And so we've invested in a digital transformation strategy focused on two things primarily. One is patient acquisition, so working to make it easier to access Overlake through digital means. And the other is top of license support for the employees, so the use of digital technologies. So that's a multi-year effort. The other is the shift to the ambulatory environment. I'm really proud, Michelle and her team is our chief nursing officer here in the second row, and they created I'm calling it a rapid ortho unit. This is where, just a couple of years ago, a hip, a total joint would be a 2, 3, 4 day length of stay. Almost all of our patients now are discharged within 24 hours. Our average length of stay in what we call our SP2, right? Our SP2, which is really in a recovery area, post-recovery, is 3 hours, same day. And the results are fantastic. And so, those kinds of things, that's an example of an intentional shift. I don't think anybody performs at the level that we perform relative to the amount of patients that we're able to discharge same day for total joints in the region. There are some things that we would like to be doing, but our scale makes it more difficult for us. We think that hospital in the home environment, and I think what we're going to find is continue to shift more and more patients into other outpatient environments, which is going to mean the types of patients we care for here in the hospital are going to be sicker and sicker and have a higher intensity of care. So the cost of care for that particular subset may go up, but the total cost of care relative to the population goes down. So, you have to be smart about how you think about that, because it's some of these very sick, multiple comorbid patients, they're extremely expensive to care for. So those would be a couple points I would make.
Mike, continuing to think ahead, from your perspective, what do you view as the greatest opportunities for Overlake? And then along with that, what are your biggest concerns?
Well, how much time do we have?
And you have to talk about opportunities as well as concerns, Mike.
Okay, which one would you like me to start with? I'll start with opportunities. So I think right out of the chute, employer of choice. You know, I've been saying for a while now that, you know, if you said, Mike, what's the singular thing that you most worry about? And if I had to just pick one, I'd say the staffing shortage. And so then you say, okay, well, in my view, there are enough healthcare workers in the Puget Sound region. Okay, this is a controversial statement to make. There's just not enough to go around. So that means I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun my fellow hiker. And so my ability to actually our ability to put ourselves in a position of being the obvious choice for our employees would be a very significant opportunity. That would elevate, because I didn't really talk too much about travelers, but you know, I think everybody understands what traveler nurses are. We've had to hire a large number of nurses in order to backfill for the nursing shortage such that we could support the demand of the capacity that we have in the facility. And those travelers are extraordinarily expensive. So I think that employer of choice is one very large opportunity. And then another one is this notion of us being around 25% of our business is in-migrating from outside of the East Side. And the East Side is a remarkable market, continues to grow. We don't want to lose sight of that. But it is pretty remarkable to me that our subspecialization strategies are working so well. And we are bringing patients from these communities at record levels that we've not brought before.
Mike, before we turn to some of the questions that were submitted by many of you beforehand, can you talk about the role that community support plays in Overlake's success?
Well, so, you know, one of the lines that I coined early in my time here is Overlake was built for the community and by the community. And that still is probably never been more an important statement than it is today. Philanthropy's never been more important than it is today. I think the concept of being an ambassador, this point that I can't tell you how many letters I've gotten in the last, say, year, different than the first 7.5, 8 years that I was here, saying I never knew about Overlake, and now that I've found you, I will never go anywhere else. When people find us, they don't want to go anywhere else, but still a lot of people haven't found us. And that still is a challenge. There's still a lot of people, especially on the west side, don't even know Overlake exists or think it's a small community hospital that doesn't provide the incredibly subspecialized care that we provide. You know, my concerns are, you know, related to the staffing shortage, inflation, and just this disequilibrium of the economics. And our ability to create runway. We have launched a $45 million, what we call sustainability plan, to help us offset some of the headwinds that we're experiencing, you know, related to the kinds of things you would imagine, related to supply chain, related to operational efficiency. Again, Michelle and her team have stood up a discharge lounge that allows patients to be discharged to a lounge in order to wait for their loved one to pick them up, to open up a bed that allows Dr. Shipley to hopefully have access to a transfer from the ED up to the floor more easily. So those are some examples. But this crisis that we're in it'll take a number of years for healthcare to overcome it, and there will be, in my view, a number of casualties as a result of that.
Yeah. Mike, I want to turn now to some of the questions that were pre-submitted. One of them is, many stories are emerging about providers opening their contracts with insurers to negotiate better terms. What is Overlake's position on that?
Well, so we've done that as well, and the payers have been pretty open. Julie Keefe is here with us today. She's our director of payer contracting. They understand the challenges that we're facing, but the payers have to, they have to sell a product to their employer groups. And while what I need is double-digit increases in order to keep up with the double-digit inflation that I'm experiencing, selling a double-digit increase for a healthcare premium to an employer when you're trying to build membership is a hard thing to do. Your HR benefits people won't return your phone calls. So our view is that we are looking for partnership relationships with payers, in the sense of thinking about which payer recognizes that there's a real value in having an organization like Overlake as an alternative to these large multi-state systems who have different kinds of contracting leverage. And as long as Overlake can stay as a single market health systems in an interdependent relationship, that's an asset to these payers. And most of them get it. And we have received some good, favorable results as to the work, but it hasn't matched the need that we have relative to the inflationary experience that I've described earlier.
I think this is an important question. Will Overlake remain independent?
Well, I feel like I'm in my job interview from...
It's a good interview so far too, by the way.
In April of 2000, or I guess it was February of 2014, literally since I started here, that question has been asked. Will Overlake remain independent? We're one of only 2 hospitals remaining in the state that is not part of a large multi-state or a large health system, or have some form of government relationship. It's got tax funding, or it's part of a university system, or it's part of a critical access environment where you're paid on a cost basis. So the other one, if you're curious, is Confluence in Wenatchee, is the other hospital. That's a 501c3. And I haven't mentioned this yet, and I want to make sure I mention this. The other challenge, I don't want you to forget, we're a large organization. Our top line's about $700 million a year. That sounded with about 3,500 employees, about 1,000 physicians on the medical staff. That sounds like a large organization, but we're also a nonprofit organization. We care for anyone and everyone, irrespective of their ability to pay. So that's another challenge that we're facing, is because there are plenty of disruptors, the technology disruptors, frankly, the Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world, that are looking to go after a lot of these private subsidies through commercial relationships, and that's definitely a threat to us. So I think I got off track. What was the?
Well, will Overlake remain independent?
Oh, so yeah, I'm not dodging this question. So. The reason why I said I've been asked this question since I've been here is because it's a fair question. I mean, we are a bit of a unicorn in the sense that we're not, and there are some things that give us certainly an asset. I think the employer of choice strategy is an asset that we're independent, but relative to certain, the payer contracting. I mean, my rates aren't the same rates that some of these large health systems have. They're just not. That makes it more of a challenge to me because I don't have the negotiating leverage that these large health systems have. That's a problem. However, having said that, I have also said it repeatedly, and I'll say today, that that we're not totally independent today. We're interdependent. One of the first things that we did when I arrived is created a partnership, a joint venture with Evergreen, to establish a neurosciences institute and to repatriate cardiac patients that they were otherwise referring to Virginia Mason to the east side here at Overlake. That's a partnership with Evergreen. We have partnerships with Kaiser. We have a partnership with Fred Hutch Cancer Center. So those are strategic partnerships aimed at really specific needs to bring more and better services to the east side. But our focus is ensuring that we will be well situated to always to always be able to provide the level of high quality, safe patient experience as we both partner and remain independent.
We have time for just one more question, and I apologize for not being able to get through all of the pre-submitted questions. They were excellent, excellent questions. Mike, you talked too long. Mike, are there plans for future community engagement in support of Overlake Medical Center and clinics?
You know, I'm not exactly sure how to respond to that question. You know, our community engagement efforts have been somewhat hampered by COVID and have been somewhat hampered by the financial crisis. I guess I think of the sweet spot of our community engagement being our ability to provide the care that we provide at the level that we provide it and to everyone who needs it. And that's the kind of community engagement that is really, I think, presents the greatest value. Beyond restorative health, which is our basic business function, I don't know that in the near term we'll be doing much more aggressive community engagement activities than we have historically done.
I just want to make one comment in closing. During my 12 years on the board, as I mentioned, I've had a chance to gain some visibility into the organization. But in the last 2 years, I've had a chance to gain some visibility into Mike and his leadership. You know, it's relatively easy to lead when times are good. It's when times are tough that leadership is difficult. It's when times are difficult that leaders are challenged to hold true to the values. So when it comes to Overlake, it's integrity, it's compassion, it's agility, it's respect, and it's engagement. And Mike not only talks about those values, but he demonstrates them through his actions. And as a board chair, as a board member, as a member of this community, we're fortunate, Mike, to have you in the role that you're in. So thank you for the leadership that you're providing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, Rob, for your leadership. Thank you, Mike. Great conversation this morning. I think the audience, you had everybody. You could tell they were with you. So fascinating. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of you again. Wanted to call out the members of our executive team. Mike mentioned Michelle Curry, our chief nursing officer, Dave Knopfler, our chief medical officer, is also here. If you have any follow-up questions as we are leaving, they're there. We are all just so grateful for all that you do to help us do what we do. And so thank you again. We will be sending a survey out. We want to hear from you. Did this hit the mark? Did you get what you needed? What other topics would you like us to bring to you when we continue our Circle of Excellence series next year? Our goal is to keep you informed and keep you feeling part of the family because, as Mike pointed out, you are, and we could not do it without all of you. So thanks again. Have a great holiday season, and class dismissed.